Hello everybody, Jared Volle here for CreativeStandUp.com. I got, for this Q&A, I had two of the nearly identical questions come in within a few days of each other. So I decided to kick this one up and do this one today because I had two requests for it. So the question is about if you do not want to become a professional comedian, but you do want to get into comedy, should you use stand-up comedy as a way of learning? Should you jump into comedy even though you might not necessarily want to become a comedian as your end goal? So I have kind of conflicting ideas on this. The part of me wants to say, please let the comedians be comedians. Like if you want to jump in and dive in and do a good job, then that's fantastic. I love that you would jump in and share the fun with us. But I also lived in LA for a while, and in LA, people think that you can just jump on stage and you can be like this really crappy comedian, and that for some reason that'll show directors that you can be a good actor or something. Like it's just the most awful stand-up comedy happens in some places. Okay, like I'm definitely not everywhere in LA for sure. There's great venues, but there is way too much really low quality comedy that is there only because people are they don't care about the actual stand-up, they just care about what they're going to get for it. But with that said, let me backpedal and say that I think jumping into stand-up comedy, if you want to be you want to get paid for any kind of humor, right? The best stand-up comedy is the best field for you to be in or for you to practice. And the number one reason that's true is because stand-up comedians have something that you can't find anywhere else. We have instant feedback, and we have an audience that changes all the time, right? You cannot find that in other areas, especially like one of the people was wanting to work in print. Like I'm a huge fan of Dave Barry. I think his stuff is hilarious. But like if you want to become that kind of a writer, that comedic writer, then it's very difficult for you to get the same kind of repetitions that stand-up comedians get. Right? So stand-up comedians, we have an audience that changes all the time, right? If depending on where you live, you can perform, 1 to 3 times or so, maybe sometimes even more, every night, right? And in some locations, I understand, I get a lot of emails from people that are in the farmlands and they can't do it, but you have the opportunity to drive a few hours and perform. As a way of getting those repetitions, and you get the instant feedback, which you cannot get anywhere else, or at least on the same level. You can get instant feedback in improvisational comedy, but you cannot test anything in improv because improv is being made as you are in the moment, right? If you write something, some kind of a joke, you can't just make sure you practice that joke in improv because the scene is going to be different than you need it, and if you force your thing into the scene, it's going to break the scene. So improv is a fantastic way. I think you should take improv classes as well. That's for a different reason. I think taking improv classes is fantastic because it'll help you get out of your head. A lot of new comedians, they're so in their head trying to write their idea of what a joke should be. And a huge part of what I try to do is try to tap back into the real person that is writing the joke instead of trying to work with what you think you should be instead of what you actually are, right? So improv is great because you don't have time to try to formulate and be witty about stuff. You just have to react. And so the real you is reacting, and you're being there in the moment with the other improvers and with the audience. And that's why such incredible comedy comes from improv. Anyway, so stand-up comedy, yes, you have the audience that rotates itself. The other great thing about the audience is that it is a random group of people, right? When you are naturally funny in real life, you can also test out your material or test out jokes, but you're doing it to a group of people that have already self-selected themselves, right? They're not a random group of people. People that have one sense of humor tend to like to hang out together, right? So when you are being like, if you're a dry, sarcastic person, you're going to naturally hang out with people that enjoy that kind of humor, right? So it is good that you can do that, but also it is different when you want to then open that up and actually create a connection to an audience that might not necessarily share that exact same, maybe like humor profile, what you might call it. So that is another great way of like learning, how do I bridge the gap between my natural sense of humor and people that I don't know, right? People that don't necessarily share that same sense of humor as I do. So if you're going into written comedy or screenplays or wherever you want to use comedy, that is still going to be a useful lesson for you, being able to bridge that gap. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that for my style, I am huge into storytelling. For me, storytelling translates to anywhere that you want it to. You can even take it into improvisational comedy. And in fact, in Playfully Inappropriate, I can't even say my own book, in Playfully Inappropriate, I even talk about whose line is it anyway, because it's a great way of studying natural humor. So I take examples from many different areas of humor instead of just talking about jokes. And the reason I do that is because when you learn storytelling structure, you see it everywhere, right? It's so easy. When you watch an episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway, you see that structure. When you watch sketch comedy, you see that same structure, right? So it translates so easily to different areas. Now, with that said, I am not a conventional joke writer, right? I never have been, or I guess I never have been. I stopped doing that early on in my career because it just did not work for me. I didn't like the idea of always writing these broken assumption jokes, and I still hate it. Anyway, I can't really comment too much on that, except to say I don't feel like a lot of that information might not translate to things like screenwriting, where storytelling would be important, right? Because imagine you're writing a screenplay and then you're trying to also apply your knowledge about broken assumption jokes. But broken assumption jokes rarely happen in nature, right? They're not a supernatural thing. They do happen, but they don't happen nearly as often, and they feel kind of weird. All right, if you were to just kind of jam a broken assumption joke into a natural conversation, it would feel weird, right? Because they're not natural. So I'm not sure if you can really translate some types of jokes or how much of that information you'd be able to translate. But for me, I feel like storytelling could easily translate into any of those areas. So that's my opinion on it. Recap, I'll say the audience is random, so you get to practice bridging the gap between you and general people, which you're going to have to do anyway if you're writing print or a screenplay or whatever. And then you get instant feedback where you can keep trying and keep experimenting until you figure it out and get it right. It's for me. If you do it, you are on YouTube. If you're not, I guess you can. Anyway, I'm Jared Volle for CreativeStandup.com. Thanks for listening. And ask your own questions. You can sign up for the newsletter questions at CreativeStandup.com.